Welcome to Hubs and Drivers, a podcast for building product marketers, sponsored by BLD Marketing. I'm Jeff Donaldson, your host. On this episode, the digital pivot, paid media strategies. You know, there's one undeniable truth in today's marketplace. Everything is digital. And it's an important consideration as a building products manufacturer when you're building your paid media strategy. Joining us today for insight on that is my colleague, Amy Meyers, Director of Paid Media here at BLD Marketing. Amy, thanks for joining us.
No problem, Jeff.
So let's talk about what might be considered the digital migration. What has precipitated that? Why are building products manufacturers at least more readily considering or even migrating to digital paid media?
Well, I don't think there's one way to answer that question because there are a lot of reasons that we got here. First of all, the publishers are offering these types of assets, but more importantly, it's about targetability, measurability, and reportability.
Those are your three big words when it comes to that.
Those are my three big words. But we can't forget that there was a pandemic. So, a lot of vendors were struggling with, sending out print publications to offices that were empty. Right? And as an advertiser, that's a waste of your budget.
Sure.
We had several clients where the pandemic hit, we put a pause on what we were doing that was print driven, and then we started looking at how we could pivot over to these digital assets that are going to give us, again, the targetability, the measurability, and the reportability that we're looking for. And as we progressed through that, and the advertisers started to see all of how those three things work together and what you could learn from that, it became less about print and more about those digital assets.
So are we at a tipping point? I mean, is there a point where now building products manufacturers shouldn't really be considering the traditional paid media strategies?
I think that there's a place for a media mix all the time, and particularly when you have to look at who your target audience is. So in this particular realm, we do still deal with architects and designers who are very tactile folks, right? They like to sit with the information, look at the pictures, and it's a different experience when you're holding a publication. So I still think there's a place for print in there, and we are still working with the traditional media partners. The same ones who are putting out those print publications also have digital editions. It's just a matter of finding the appropriate digital asset for what it is you're trying to achieve.
But back to your point of measuring and being able to target, in many ways, digital is more engineered for that. It's much more measurable. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and I don't want it to sound like a panacea, right? Because it's a lot of art and science together, right? So we are able to see, for example, when we send out an e-blast, how many were delivered, how many were opened, what was clicked on, how much time people spent with it. Sometimes there are opportunities to put video assets embedded within that type of asset,
right.
And you can see how many people actually completed watching your video or what % they watched through. So there's a lot more information to be gleaned through digital assets that we are utilizing.
So let's talk about some examples, because there are many ways to incorporate digital marketing into your paradigm, into your paid media strategy. Offer up some examples and maybe give us some top-line descriptions of them.
Sure. So case studies. So it's like the traditional version that we utilize, but with different types of video assets around them or clickable links within them that talk specifically about a certain project. There are also product alerts, product e-blasts. The thing is, all of these vendors call them different things. So most of them are HTML e-blasts that we do. Some are co-branded. Some are coming more from the advertiser. It's a mixture of those types of things. Yeah, those are the top ones that we utilize.
So there's also SEM. There are other types of digital advertising that can be critical to fold in there. How do you prioritize? How do you determine what makes sense when you're choosing digital advertising for a client?
I think we look at what the goals and objectives are. So the SEM that you mentioned is kind of a bread and butter thing. That kind of is the low-hanging fruit. People are actively searching for your product or service.
Right.
Then you have, if you have a need to drive traffic to your landing page or your website, programmatic does an excellent job of that because, again, that's looking at driving traffic based off of a persona that you've created that outlines who your target audience is. And then those two things work in conjunction with the more traditional types of assets, like the product alerts and the case studies and those types of things, the e-blasts. And all those things together give you a more holistic approach in how you can reach your audience. You
mentioned case studies, and that's often when, in some sense, somebody within the company or their partner, like BLD Marketing, the agency that a building products manufacturer can go out and hire, will be the brand journalist and go write that story for the brand. But content is key when it comes to digital advertising. Talk a little bit about that.
So we seek out assets that allow us to tell a very specific story that the client wants to talk about. So if it's a new product, we can then frame that up and it tells the story from our perspective. So we have control over that. We speak with the client's voice in that manner, as opposed to having it reported on for us by somebody else. Right. And so we get to choose the message and how we want to frame that up for folks. And that, I think, is important too, as opposed to just plunking a banner out there that is a limited amount of real estate, right? So again, all these things working together.
So you talked about measurability. How important is it to measure a campaign, and what can you learn from it?
So we always try to put UTM codes on all of the assets that have clickable links in them, and then that way we can go over on the Google Analytics side and see bounce rates, time spent, pages viewed, those kinds of interactions, where people traveled once we got them to the landing page, and that helps us to learn and predict what we're going to be doing moving forward, what was successful, areas that we should avoid for the following year's plan because it didn't have the kind of traction that we were hoping for. We've tried a couple of things that, on paper looked really great. Right. This should work. This should stand out.
And you can change it when it's digital.
Right. That's the other thing. If it's not working, we go to something else. And that is the beauty of digital, right? We're not committed to it, as opposed to once that magazine is printed, it's out the door. I can't take that ad back.
Now, you mentioned UTM code. That's basically a tracking mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. So it allows you to track the performance of your ad, or better yet, who's clicked through it. Really is a...
We know who the vendor is, we know what the ad content is, and then we know how much time they spent on the site once we got them there. Did they bounce off of it? Was it sticky content? And I think that helps inform the content team too. Oh, look, these types of topics really resonated with the audience, so we need more of those. Or this one just kind of, didn't really go as where we thought it was going to go, so maybe we should avoid that.
Lots to consider. Amy, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So consider this statistic. According to one study, business-to-business ad spend is expected to increase to $30 billion in 2023. And nearly half of those dollars will go to digital. That's pretty amazing. Would you like us to cover a specific issue on hubs and drivers? Or maybe you have a question for one of our subject matter experts. Reach out to us. Email us at info@hubsanddriverspodcast.com. That's info@hubsanddriverspodcast.com. That's all for this edition of Hubs and Drivers. I'm Jeff Donaldson. Join us next time.